Hi, I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching us tonight. Dealing with the villain Putin, that is the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. So far, it's been all talk, no action. Politicians in the USA and Western Europe all condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but doing little else. The Russian dictator himself smirking at the world and testing the will of the Western powers. Putin clearly believing that Europe will back down, isolating President Obama and the USA. And he could be right. The British media reporting that the UK government will not curb trade with Russia or even impose sanctions against Putin. If that's true, Putin wins. As far as France is concerned, they want to have, quote, mediation. That'll frighten old Vlad, won't it? Germany says that Putin is living in another world. But since Russia is Germany's biggest supplier of energy, Putin can live in any world he wants to live in. Once again, the Germans will likely fold. The Italian government wants to, quote, suspend the preparations for the G8 summit in Russia, set to be held in June. Not suspend the summit, suspend preparations. Ooh. So you can see that Putin's having a grand old time violating international law and watching the Western powers kneel. Today in Ukraine, Secretary of State Kerry put forth more rhetoric.
The Russian government, out of excuses, hiding its hand behind falsehoods, intimidation, and provocations. In the hearts of Ukrainians and the eyes of the world, there is nothing strong about what Russia is doing.
He has to read that. Kerry has to read that off of paper, you know? Talk from the heart, Mr. Secretary. Now, in a way, you got to hand it to Putin. He knows the West is weak. He knows President Obama will most likely not be able to rally the European nations against him. In short, Putin knows he can pretty much do what he wants to do, and he's enjoying the spectacle. A lot of attention on that narcissist. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, is supposed to be the bulwark against Russian oppression. The USA funds 22% of NATO's military budget, far more than any other nation. In Afghanistan, America is supplying 64% of NATO troops. So without us, NATO does not exist. But with us, NATO pretty much does not exist because it's powerless, as European governments time after time back away from confronting illegal international behavior. I hate to use the cliche, but the Ukraine situation, same old, same old. And Putin knows it. And that's a memo. Now for the top story tonight, reaction. Join us in Washington, Fox News analyst Charles Krauthammer. So where am I going wrong here, Charles?
Well, I think you got it right talking about individual nations. I wouldn't blame NATO as an institution because NATO has one purpose, to defend its own countries against Soviet and now Russian aggression, and that it's never been challenged, but it did succeed 50 years. The Russians never crossed the line into Berlin. They never crossed the line into Germany. The problem for NATO is when it acts out of area, meaning in Afghanistan or Ukraine. Remember, the Bush administration wanted to bring Ukraine into NATO. So that would have triggered a NATO response to the invasion that we're seeing now. But the Europeans did not want to get involved in Ukraine because they thought it was dangerous. So they're very much unwilling to risk anything. However, I do think for the Poles and the others, Czechs, the Baltic states, and of course the West Europeans, if there were an invasion of any of those countries, you'd have a very different response.
Okay, but Putin knows the line he can go into.
Right.
And he knows that President Obama is not going to rally Britain, Germany, France to his cause. Even, look, I said last night in a very perspicacious, and you'll appreciate that word, perspicacious talking points memo, that the USA and Western Europe working together can ruin the Russian currency, the ruble. And they can do it fairly quickly because the ruble's on the ropes now. And all they would have to do would just be impose banking sanctions, and the ruble would just, boom, like this, and then Putin's in big, big trouble with his own people. You would think that would be the logical way to go, and that President Obama would be able to rally everybody to do that, but it's not going to happen.
Look, there are several reasons. One reason is that Obama's a little bit late at rallying anybody against anybody. He comes into office, and what's the first thing he does with the Russians? He announces the famous reset. Now, the reason that we had a reset was because relations had, as Obama said, drifted in the Bush years. Why did they drift? Because Putin had invaded Georgia about 6 months earlier. As a result, the U.S. and the allies had put sanctions on Russia. They had frozen relations. The first thing Obama does when he comes into office, the reset means the reversal of all the freezes, all the sanctions. So, you know, this is a free you pass, a get out of jail.
And Putin didn't have to give anything to get that. He didn't give up anything.
He didn't give up anything.
Right.
So that's the first signal the Europeans are getting from this new president. Second signal, what does Obama do? He cancels the missile defense agreement the Poles and the Czechs had agreed to under the Bush administration, knowing it was unpopular because the Russians opposed it. The Russians put a lot of pressure. Obama cancels it unilaterally without even asking the Poles and the Czechs, leaving their leaders way out on a limb, humiliating them, and telling Eastern Europe, you think you won your freedom at the end of the Cold War? Well, Russia still has a hand. I'm allowing Russia to influence your future.
Why did he do that? I don't recall. There was an explanation from the Obama administration on why they did that. Do you recall the explanation?
Their explanations were completely bogus. What they wanted to do is to show the Russians, they wanted to show to Putin that they were open, accommodating. Obama's whole theory of international relations was, if I'm nice to Iran, if I offer them all kinds of goodies, if I'm nice to the North Koreans, if I'm nice to any adversaries anywhere, I'll give them an open hand. Remember? Open hand, more respect for the Muslims. He wanted to show the Russians that he was willing to bury the hatchet on all the past, and then he wanted cooperation in other areas. Putin looks at this guy and says, I'm dealing with an adolescent. This is a community organizer. He doesn't understand how the world works. What Putin did, KGB agent and a thug, he pockets all the things Obama offers him for nothing. He walks away, and then he struts the world stage, knowing that he's got an adversary in the White House who will do nothing. And he has done nothing.
But he has to do something now, Obama, or he goes down into Jimmy Carter territory. We're going to talk about that later. But the president has to do something now, does he not?
He's going to do a few things. He'll begin to free some assets. He's canceled the military relations. He's canceled all diplomatic connections. That's all good, but not quite enough. What he needs to do is to send the chairman of the Joint Chiefs to the Baltic states and to announce tomorrow joint exercises with those states. They're worried. They're quaking in their boots. Estonia, Lithuania, they all have large Russian populations like Ukraine, which could be an excuse for the Russians to go in. Kerry should stop in Poland on the way back, announce military exercises with the U.S. on the Ukrainian frontier.
Put the missiles back.
Well, the problem is if you are a Polish leader or a Czech leader, and here's Obama who pulled the rug out from under you and humiliated you 5 years ago, are you going to agree to do it again? What you got to do with the missiles, you have to go behind the scenes and offer it again to the Poles and the Czechs.
See if they'll take it.
Say you're sorry and work out a deal, but don't announce it in public.
All right, Charles. Thanks very much. We appreciate it. Reminder, Charles.